UFOs seem to be invading both our skies and our news outlets like never before. And more people are starting to look up and are wondering who or what might be out there. In 2016, Ryan Sprague introduced the world to countless UFO encounters that had never been made public before. And now, in the second edition of his book, he revisits these events and introduces brand new UFO cases in Somewhere in the Skies, a human approach to the UFO phenomenon. How have these events changed the lives of those involved? And what might it tell us about the phenomenon? With in-depth follow-ups, brand new chapters, and detailed testimony from credible witnesses and insight from those in the psychological, academic, and scientific fields, Somewhere in the Skies, a human approach to the UFO phenomenon, weaves together a story of stories, attempting to get to the heart of these mysteries one experience at a time. Available now on Amazon in both paperback and ebook. To learn more, visit somewhereintheskies.com. This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Hey Ryan, it's Allie from Jersey. Messaged you a couple days ago. I think I'm ready to share my encounter. So this happened maybe about 8-9 years ago. So I had a friend over who was a ex-coworker, and he was really close with my aunt. My aunt lives literally like 2 streets down from me. So when he stopped by to visit, I, asked him like, hey, you want to go visit my aunt? Say what's up. He was down for it. So we walked down the street to my aunt's house. It was probably like spring fallish in the evening, because the sky kind of had that pretty cotton candy, pinky, purpley, bluish kind of look. Like the sun was kind of setting a little bit. So for whatever reason, we were standing in the middle of the street talking instead of like in my aunt's yard or on the sidewalk. So anyway, we're standing in the middle of the street, and towards the end of our conversation, we're getting ready to say our goodbyes, and we all just happened to look up into the left of where we were standing, and there were these 3 like white circular glowing spheres. They almost looked like when the moon is full, how it has that glow. There was 3 of them in a triangular shape, just kind of off in the distance. And at first we were kind of like, what the hell is that? Like it just looked weird. And they were bright enough to where up against the sky they stood out pretty well. So we're just standing there for a while trying to figure out what it is. They weren't moving or anything. And my first thought was like, oh, weather balloons. But they just didn't, something was just off. They just didn't look like weather balloons. So as we're standing there trying to figure out what it was, one of them, it was almost like they had a string hanging from the bottom, and they were like tethered to the ground because they were just like kind of just stuck in place. And one by one, it was like someone just cut the string and they just started to release into the air. And we're kind of just standing there like, the hell is that? And as they're like floating up into the sky, like they were staying like same distance apart. Like they weren't like bobbing or anything. They just shot straight up, but slow enough to where we were like, the hell is going on? And as they were going up into the sky, we kind of looked further back into the sky, and we noticed there were probably like 20 more of these spheres that we just didn't notice the first time, because the 3, like, you kind of couldn't tell how far they were, because first glance they looked kind of close, but as we were kind of focusing in on them, they were kind of far out there. So when we seen all these other spheres that were like glowing, like all these little moons just kind of shooting up into the sky. Like, I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it. But there were like 20 other ones, and they all just, like, when the first 3 kind of released and started to shoot up, the other ones just followed after it, and we were just kind of stuck. I don't remember there being any kind of sound, and we were kind of close to a busy road, so you can typically hear cars and horns and all of that, but we didn't hear anything. We just heard each other, and it was like just dead silence all around us, and we were just standing there looking at these globes, these glowing globes just shoot up into the sky, and it was the weirdest, craziest, warmest kind of feeling. I don't know. It was just bizarre. So from listening to your podcast and listening to other encounters or stories that you've told or people that you've had on your podcast, I truly think it was something from another world. And it was like those three globes were like kind of, it felt like they were kind of just there watching us, just like peeping the scenery. And then when we kind of looked up and noticed them and tried to like piece together what they were like, oh shit, gotta go, and just kind of released up into the sky. If it wasn't for all of those other ones, and there were so many, if it wasn't for all of those other ones, I probably just would have chalked it up to some weird shit in Jersey, like, who knows. But because there were so many other ones, we kind of just stood there and was like, what the fuck? And just gave each other that awkward stare and was like, you know what? I think it's time to go. And we just kind of, my aunt went back to her house. Me and my friend walked up the street. He jumped in his car and left. And we just never spoke about it since. But from listening to your wonderful podcast, it's kind of brought that moment back up. And I've really, really been thinking about what it could possibly be. So I'm not sure what it was. It feels like and seems like something unworldly. I would love to hear what you think. So yeah, thank you for the podcast. I love it, and you're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Hi, my name is Troy Peasley. I'm 43 years old. I'm a security officer, and I work in Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia. I'd like to share with you guys a story that happened to me a very long time ago. I was 12 years old, so I guess I'll start from the beginning. When I was younger, my mother would take myself and my little brother on holidays to see my cousins, and they lived in Redcliffe. Now, Redcliffe is north of Brisbane, and we'd go there whenever we had the chance. Usually it'd be on like school holidays, and there's a whole heap of cousins around Redcliffe. This specific time we were up seeing my cousins in Redcliffe, and I don't know about you guys, but every time I got with my cousins, we would run amok, as kids do. We were very active kids. I know if that's just a nice way of saying that we were little delinquents, but I don't think we were. Anyway, this one particular night, my mother was, she'd get together with all my aunties, and they would play cards and whatnot, have a few drinks, while all of us kids would basically run amok. Now, I think it was around 10 o'clock at night. It may have been my idea, I'm not sure. My cousins were a couple of years younger than me, so it probably was my idea. But I wanted to go exploring. Now, Redcliffe, where they lived, was right, probably a 5 to 7 minute walk to the Redcliffe beach, which is where we spent most of our time when we were visiting my cousins. So it was about 10 o'clock at night. My aunties and mum were busy, so I thought, okay, let's go for a little wander. And we were pretty mischievous, and we were causing havoc. We were throwing stones and just being little rascals. So yeah, but we finally got to the beach, And anyone who knows Redcliffe Beach, it's a beautiful stretch of beach. It was 10 o'clock at night. It was clear weather. It was a beautiful spring weather. I guess it would have been about 27 degrees. Don't hold me to that, but it was a warm night. I remember that. And as we were walking, one of my cousins, there was about 4 of us all up on this particular night, and my cousin Sean looked up and he said, "Oh, look, a shooting star." And we'd seen hundreds of shooting stars, but anyway, we all looked up, and as we were watching the shooting star, now it come down just like a shooting star would, and so we were watching it, but all of a sudden this, what we thought at the time was a shooting star, it changed direction and it come towards us, and it started to slow down, and it looked like a yellow object. But I know this doesn't sort of make sense, but it you could tell that it was like a metallic object. I know that sounds whatever, but I just remember it. You could tell that it was had a metallic base to it. It was very bright. It was mostly like a yellowish colour, or even a goldish colour. It was sort of like a ball, like a bright ballish colour. Ball object with a goldish yellow colour to it. Now, as it started to slow, it actually stopped, and it started to rotate in a circular motion, like it started to go around in circles. Okay, and then it stopped again, and it went on. The only way I can describe it is it went on its side. It shifted its axis, if that makes sense. It went on its side. And then in a blink of an eye, it shot up on an angle, but the fastest thing you could imagine, like turning off a light switch, it was that quick, and it was gone. And it did leave I don't know whether it was because of the speed or whether it was an actual some type of fuel, or whether it was that quick that it left like a reflection or a light behind it. But thinking back now and talking to my cousin, we're in our 40s, and our story has never changed. And I remember that night we were that excited. We were excited, but a little, I don't know, I wouldn't call it scared, but weirded out, I guess would be something I would describe. We were weirded out, what the hell was that sort of a thing. But we were that excited and, I don't know, weirded out that we ran home to tell our parents, and we burst through the door, and we didn't even think that, hey, we snuck out. So we burst through the door and told our aunties and my mother, and the only thing that they were concerned about at the time was us sneaking out. So we were punished and sent to bed. But the next day, one of my aunties, wanted to know what we saw, and we described what we saw and told her about it. And for days, I remember her going through newspapers and news reports, seeing if anything had been reported, and there was nothing. Now, many years on, every time I get with my cousins, that's the first thing we talk about, is what we saw that night. And I can tell you now that I have researched UFOs ever since that moment, and I can tell you it definitely wasn't a meteorite, it wasn't a comet, it wasn't a weather balloon, it wasn't a plane, it wasn't a jet, it wasn't Venus. It was something that I have never seen again, and it was definitely a UFO. One of my cousins is now in the Air Force, and as you can imagine, I ask a lot of questions, but he doesn't say too much. He keeps that sort of what he saw to himself, as you can imagine. But my other cousins, that we know what we saw that night, and it was definitely well, it was a UFO. So thank you for listening to me, and thank you for letting me share my story.
My name is Alex, and I live in Staten Island, New York. This happens like a year ago. I was coming home from work. It was like 5-6 p.m. And as I was walking to the back door, something shiny caught my eye in the sky that looked like a shape of a disc. And it looked like the sun was reflecting right through it because it was so shiny that looked like a fireball. But it wasn't moving, it was just static, never moved from that position. It didn't make no sound at all. This thing was like there, just static, like for several minutes. I was so in shock that to see this that I couldn't even take out my phone. That would be the first reaction, to start recording. But it's just, I was so in shock that I couldn't do it. I couldn't move. And the first thing that came in my mind was to tell my wife. As soon as I turned around and I opened the door to tell her, when I looked back, that thing was gone. It just disappeared. Didn't make no sound. No, nothing. I didn't hear anything. And as I told my wife about what I seen, she didn't want to believe me. And funny thing that after my experience, the next day or two, she experienced it too while she was playing outside with my two kids. She said that the weird thing is that they try to record a video with her cell phone, and this UFO or whatever it is, they couldn't record it with any cell phone at the house. They try to get their nephews outside because that thing, the UFO, it lasted for several minutes, and she had the chance to go back inside and tell her nephews to come outside, and they were able to see it too. And as soon as they tried to record it with their cell phone, they couldn't get nothing on camera. That's the weirdest thing, that they were all in shock. They were pointing at it with their cell phones, but they couldn't get no image, no video, no nothing. And until this day, we don't know what we saw. We come to a conclusion that this must be some really high technology from somewhere else, because again, we never seen anything like this before.
Hi, my name's Daniel Custer. Most people call me Dan. I'm just recording a recording about my UFO sighting that I had back in 1993. It was also witnessed by myself and my parents. It occurred in a little town approximately 65 kilometres or about 40 miles southwest of Sydney, Australia. I have previously reported it to MUFON. It was investigated actually by the National Director for MUFON Australia in New Zealand, who just by chance happened to have grown up in the same little town that I grew up in, just on the outskirts of Sydney. And He actually had a UFO sighting there himself in the 70s. My sighting was in 1993. It occurred on the 6th of April 1993. It was 27 and a half years ago. And even though it was a long time ago, I did write down the events of the sighting not long after, just so I would have a record of it for myself, because it was an extraordinary event. And I know how time fades memory, so I wanted to keep a record of what exactly occurred that night. It's basically the same report that I filed with MUFON years later and the one I am sharing with you now. So it occurred at approximately just after 9 p.m. or around 9 p.m. on the 6th of April 1993. I was sitting in the lounge room of my parents' house watching TV. My parents were sitting in the back room, the back living room, watching TV in that room, so they were sitting in another room to me. A little bizarre in that I was sitting there watching TV, wide awake 1 minute, so this was probably at about maybe, 5 to 9 or something that night, and from 1 second to the next I basically just started feeling this overwhelming sense of tiredness and fatigue, like I was about to drop asleep then and there, and so that was unusual, as I was wide awake 1 second earlier, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of tiredness that I needed to get to bed. And so I went to bed, and I was laying in bed. My bedroom faced out to the backyard, so I had a window that looked out to the backyard. And my bed was basically below the window, so I was laying in bed on my side facing away from the window. And even though I'd felt this overwhelming sense of tiredness which drove me to bed, I was laying there awake for probably 10 or 15 minutes when suddenly, I don't know why, but for some reason I felt this urge to just turn around. Then I turned around and looked out the window, and what I saw was basically this craft which was completely soundless. And as I turned around and looked out the window, and all I could see was this craft just basically moving from the house. It was just moving from the house over to the backyard as I looked out the window. So I just saw this craft drifting over the backyard. It was this silver metallic coloured craft, round, typical what you would describe as a flying saucer, I suppose. Look, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Basically, I recall turning around a couple of times and then looking back out the window because I thought I was seeing things, and once I established that I was wide awake and that I wasn't seeing things and this thing was there, I went running out to my parents, basically to the kitchen window. So my parents were sitting in the living room beside the kitchen, but the room they were sitting in, they had the shutters down so they couldn't see out the window. So I came running out saying basically, look, there's something over the backyard and it looks like a UFO or something, come and have a look, and my parents came out to the kitchen where I was standing at that point at the kitchen window, and all three of us saw this thing, and I remember telling my mum to go and get the camera, but being 1993, we didn't have cell phones or cameras in our pockets or whatever, we basically had a camera with, cameras back then took film, so we had a camera, but we didn't have film, and we didn't own a video camera. We couldn't photograph this thing, so I wanted to get a closer look at this thing, so I decided to go out to the backyard. I remember my mum saying something along the lines of, don't go out there, you might get abducted, and I basically just laughed and kept going and went out to the backyard, and my dad followed me out, and so the two of us were basically standing there in the backyard, and just as I walked out to the backyard, followed by my dad, maybe 5 or 10 seconds later, this thing started to move off slowly, so it just started to slowly fly off. As I said, completely soundless, made no noise whatsoever. Was approximately 10 to 15 meters in diameter, so that's maybe 30 to 40 feet in diameter. Probably from bottom to top of the craft, 2 to 3 meters high, so what's that, 6 to 8 feet. And it was probably only, I would say, 15 to 20 meters or 45 to 60 feet above us, so it was very close sighting. All three of us described having seen the exact same thing. It definitely looked like a structured, manufactured craft. So your typical silver metallic coloured disc-shaped UFO, I guess. It had a long rectangular red light with two square white lights on each side of the red light on the back of the craft. Definitely didn't see any windows or portholes or anything on the craft, and didn't see any dome on top of it, so just a silver disc-shaped craft with lights on the back. And as we went out to the backyard, it started to fly off slowly in probably in first an easterly, then more of a northeasterly direction, gaining in height and speed the further it got away. How does that make me feel, the whole sighting thing? Well, prior to this sighting, I can't say I had a great interest in UFOs. I mean, I'd obviously heard of them, seen the movies and all that sort of stuff like anyone. My mum was obviously influenced by that as well. I mean, her comment, "Don't go out there, you might get abducted," pretty much says it all. You know, I guess we're conditioned to think that these things are extraterrestrial through TV and media, but prior to that I personally had no interest in UFOs. I guess, I mean, I was 17 at the time, and I wouldn't say I was a disbeliever, but I wasn't a believer. I was sort of like, you know, they could exist, but who knows? And I'd never put much more thought into it than that at that point in my life. My dad, complete skeptic, doesn't believe in aliens visiting Earth, anything like that. I will admit that since the sighting, I developed a keen interest in the topic for a while, and I read books about it, and I did start leaning towards the extraterrestrial hypothesis myself, but I never 100% have believed in what UFOs are, and they could be many different things. And to this day, I don't claim to know what we saw that night. I did lean towards the extraterrestrial hypothesis for a long time, but would never say with 100% certainty. My dad takes the correct position in saying, I mean, he acknowledges having seen it still to this day, but he's always taken the correct position in saying, I don't know what it was. And truth be told, I don't know what it was either. It's changed my life in the sense that, I mean, since then I have had an interest in UFOs. I've also had more of an interest just in the universe in general. And even though I can't say what it was, I have to say that the more I learn about this topic, the less I seem to know about it, because there is just such a wealth of information out there and so many people with different opinions. But all I can say is I don't know what it was other than a UFO, which is exactly what that stands for, an unidentified flying object. It has changed my life in that it's definitely made me interested in them, and I would love to know before I die what the hell we saw that night and what UFOs are, and are they different things, or can they, I mean, yeah, I just want, it's basically put me on a lifelong search for answers. Not that it's consumed my entire life. I don't, you know, just read UFO books or study the subject or whatever, but I have had an interest ever since then, and that interest has definitely rekindled a lot more over the last few years. That it's been getting a lot more mainstream media attention again. Yeah, so that's my story. Thanks for listening.
My name is Jack. I live in Norfolk, Virginia currently. I'm nearly 50 years old. In the late 70s, I'm 8 or 9 years old at the time, and we're shopping at a strip mall. My mom's in the inside the grocery store. My dad, my brother, and I are in the car. I'm in the back seat with a Matchbox car, and I'm playing with it in the back window of my dad's Ford Galaxy. I don't know if you know, but those things can be good size, especially the back windows. Anyway, I'm playing with the car in the back, on the back windowsill, and I look up in the sky, and I see what I think at first is a hot air balloon, like the Goodyear blimp. And I'm looking, and I get all excited, tell my dad and brother. My brother's 2-3 years old at the time, so he has no clue. My dad's in the front seat. He goes, yeah, okay, whatever. So I keep looking, and a couple of seconds after I see it, I realize there's no gondola on the bottom. Okay, so it's not a blimp. Then what is it? As it continues, it's passed through my field of view, which is framed by the building to my left and a clump of trees on my right. I see that it's smooth, not like a blimp. It's completely smooth. And I notice something. It looks like a mirror because it's reflecting the sky. And I swear to you, I can see the rare cloud that is up there. I can see it reflect off this thing, whatever it is. And the thing just keeps going. There's no contrail. There's no anything being left behind. So I'm thinking to myself, what is this? And I continue to watch it. I'm just watching this thing. I have no idea what it is. And I continue to watch it. And the only thing that I can compare it to in terms of what I've seen of UFO stuff since this, the closest thing is the New Mexico sheriff, the one that had the encounter in the desert. I can't remember his name or the city he's from at the time. But anyway, it continues across my field of view, and then about halfway through, I see two jets giving chase. They must have been scrambled out of NES Langley or whatever. So I'm continuing to watch this thing happen, and I take a brief look around, and I don't see hardly anybody seeing this. So I continue to look up, and the thing was moving fairly slowly to my knowledge. At the time, it was moving across the sky. And this thing, once I see the jets come into view, it looked like it sped up. That's the only way I can explain it. It looked like it might have sped up. Because by the time the jets get a quarter of the way through my field of view, this thing is already getting ready to disappear behind the buildings. And I'm thinking to myself, what is this? And I get all excited. I get hyped up like I've had like 50 things of sugar or something. 50 pieces of candy or something back then. And I'm hype. I'm going, Dad, did you see what I see? And he's in the front seat. He can't see out the back. So he has no idea what I'm talking about. And he has no interest of getting out of the car to look. And my little brother's in his car seat, so he has no way to know what's going on other than what I'm telling him. And before the airplanes get too far into my field of view, the thing's already gone. Now, a couple of things. First off, it was teardrop shaped, so that the teardrop, the pointed end, is moving forward. It looked absolutely smooth. No seams on it whatsoever. And also, like I said, it looked like it was a mirror finish on the bottom of it, because it looked like it was reflecting the sky. And for a split second, I thought I could see something that would be akin to maybe trying to reflect the sun off of it. But it was just briefly. Most of it was looking like it was trying to reflect sky. So it looked like it was trying to blend into the sky. And I have no idea what it is. To this day, I don't know. And the only thing that lends any credence to it for me, that makes me think I saw something, is because I saw the planes give chase. Otherwise, I might have put it out of my mind and forgotten all about it. But when the planes started giving chase, I'm seeing something real here. I have no idea what it was. It could be alien. It could be man-made. Something that's still to come. Or something that we may never get to find out about. Whatever it was like nothing I've ever seen in the sky. I mean, it looked somewhere between a blimp, a teardrop, and a missile. No contrail, no noise except for the planes. This thing did not make a sound. Now, I can speculate for days on what it could be, but bottom line is I have no clue.
Hello people, I'd like to share a story with you, which a UFO story which has happened to myself and my brother around 40 years ago. So it was a long time ago, but the relevance of it has not changed. Briefly, my brother and I witnessed a chase between two hostile craft. The chase resulted in one of those craft crashing into a tree, and a third party was involved. That third party was able to get a close-up look at the craft. It measured around 8 meters long and appeared like a yellow speedboat shape from the underneath. I suppose I'll go into some detail about what my brother and I witnessed. We were quite young at the time, but our house looked over a valley up towards the township of Stirling. At the end of the valley there was a ridge with some pine trees on it, and we knew the valley well. We'd hear cars and helicopters and any other mechanical devices. The sound seemed to echo down the valley. Well, on this particular night, my brother called out and said, "Phil, come and check this out." At the end of the valley, just above the tree line, was a yellow object. It was hovering, wobbling around, then it would resume its hover. And we knew that this was not any ordinary craft, so we were pretty interested. A few minutes later, a red object joined this yellow object, and it was almost had a cartoon-like quality to it. The red object zoomed up to the yellow object, reversed up, and then zoomed up again, as if the yellow occupants had not actually noticed the presence of it. The yellow object took off as fast as a rocket, and the red object followed. So these craft zigzagged across our valley, back and forth, many times in very close pursuit, sort of like a couple of blowflies. If you've ever watched a couple of blowflies zipping around the sky, they almost operate as if they're on the same brain, because they stay such a close uniform distance apart. It's quite impressive to watch, and these craft performed like that. Every now and again the yellow object became stuck, as if it was caught by some invisible force, and it would shake back and forth, and then it would free itself and the chase would continue. The sort of movements of these craft were nothing like any conventional aircraft could do. The accelerations were instant, so they'd be from a stationary position, get to a speed instantly, and stop, turn, reverse with no change in velocity at all. So it was like watching ping pong balls bounce off of a wall. They'd obviously overcome the barriers of inertia. There appeared to be no inertia to the movements of these craft. We had enough time to run into our parents' room and try to get them out of bed to come and watch this, but they told us to go back to sleep, so they perhaps didn't believe us. Eventually the yellow craft had enough of this chase and took off to our right and disappeared behind a hill. That was the end of the event. We didn't see any more chasing, and we didn't see any more craft. We waited probably for an hour afterwards to see if they'd reappear, but they didn't. All up, the sighting lasted maybe 15 minutes in total. Now, 2 days later, in the paper, another chap had reported on the same night at the same time, hearing a loud crash. He ran out the back of his house, shone the torch into a tree, and saw this yellow object wedged some 30 or 40 metres into the upper branches of this tree. He described it as an 8-metre long yellow speedboat shape from the underside. Now, the craft had knocked off a branch measuring some 30 centimetres in diameter, and had done significant damage to the tree. So it had a pretty significant impact, but it wasn't destroyed. Daryl, the chap who had witnessed this, called the police, and they did turn up, but by the time they turned up, the craft had disappeared. But from my brother's perspective and my own perspective, we knew Daryl was telling the truth, because we had witnessed the same event on the same night at the same time, and where the craft had disappeared to, from our own vision, was where Daryl lived, which was behind that hill. So we knew that the two events, or the two sightings, were the same event. So I guess my reason for bringing this out to public is that I'm hoping to bring the conversation, to move the conversation forward beyond the believe it or not stage. Most of the public still seem unconvinced that we are actually being visited, and from my own perspective, there is no question. These craft were so far beyond the human inventory, especially during the 1980s, when I think the first handheld calculator only came out in 1972 into Australia. So we were still pretty primitive as far as electronic technology went, and these craft performed like nothing that the human inventory had in its possession. So it leaves very little other explanations except to say that these intelligences behind these craft were non-human and likely extraterrestrial. So the question is, or the questions which I would like the conversation to pursue is, what are they doing here? You know, these are important questions. Are they here to help us, or are they here to protect their own interest in the planet? This is the level of conversation that we need to get to, and we need to move beyond the believe it or not stage. I believe that the conversation is very important. The fact that my brother and I witnessed conflict tells us an enormous amount about the makeup of the visitors who are doing stuff on Earth. If there's conflict that still exists within these extraterrestrial groups, then it's likely that self-interest also exists. And this is sort of probably one of the most important parts of the conversation, is that a lot of the conversation seems to be, or a lot of witnesses seem to think that they're here to help us. Well, it may be that these entities are more benevolent than the human race. After all, we're pretty well like Planet of the Apes. We're a bunch of warring tribes, so there's no credits to the human species at all. But whether they're here to help us or protect their own interest is really the big question. I'd hope that you guys consider, from your own experiences, what sort of evidence that you've witnessed personally that will add to this story. And I encourage you guys to bring it out so that we can begin a conversation, because our governments are not. Our institutions are letting us down. They've been in denial as much as most of the general public. So thanks for listening, and I hope I'll speak to you again.
Somewhere in the Skies is produced by Third Kind Productions in association with the Entertainment One Podcast Network.